There was a time when no human voice had ever crossed the air, no firelight moved in the dark, no footsteps followed a path. The forests belonged to rain, insects, birds, and great animals whose names did not exist yet. Mountains stood without being watched. Rivers flowed without being remembered. The world was not young, and it was not empty. It was ancient, alive, and completely unaware that one day a small creature would rise, look around, and begin to call it home. But before that happened, what did Earth feel like without us? Before humans ruled the world, there was no one to stand beneath the sky and call it the world. There was no word for morning, no word for forest, no word for river, no word for home. Light came over the land, but no human eye waited for it. Rain fell into leaves, mud, stone, and water, but no one listened and thought of it as weather. A river moved through a valley without being named, and the valley held the river without being drawn on any map. This is where the story must begin. Not with people arriving, not with tools, not with fire, but with the older Earth itself. It was not empty. It was not unfinished. It was already full of movement, sound, hunger, growth, decay, and time. The strange thing is that almost everything we usually use to understand the world did not exist yet. There were no paths made by repeated human feet. There were no campfires glowing in the dark. There were no shelters built from branches, bones, hides, or stone. There were no stories passed from one voice to another. There was no one asking where the animals went, when the rain would stop, which hill was safe, or what the stars meant. The land had shape, but not human meaning. A mountain was only lifted stone and weathered rock. A cave was only an opening in the earth. A plain was only open ground, grass, dust, insects, and distance. A forest was not wilderness, because wilderness is a human idea. Before us, it was simply forest, roots below, leaves above, shade between, and life moving through it in ways no one recorded. To imagine this clearly, we have to remove ourselves from the center very slowly. We have to stop seeing every place as a place for people to enter, use, fear, own, or remember. A riverbank before humans was not a good campsite. It was wet soil, reeds, insects, tracks of animals, and water moving past. A fallen branch was not fuel. It was shelter for beetles, food for fungi, and future matter for the ground. A fruit was not something waiting to be gathered by a hand. It was part of a plant's life, part of an animal's meal, part of a seed's chance to travel. The world before humans ruled it did not arrange itself around human needs. It followed older rules: sunlight, water, heat, cold, hunger, reproduction, accident, and change. Animals crossed land because bodies needed food and safety. Plants grew where conditions allowed them to grow. Dead things returned to soil, insects, scavengers, and time. Nothing was simple, but nothing needed to be explained in human words in order to exist. A shore could be struck by waves for thousands of years before anyone thought of it as an edge between places. A cave could stay dark through countless nights before any hand carried fire inside it. A herd could move across open ground without leaving more than a few temporary marks in dust or mud. Birds could call from branches without becoming signs, omens, or memories. The stars could shine over forests, swamps, plains, and seas without being joined into shapes by human imagination. This is the first quiet truth of the ancient world. It had no human memory, but it was still real. It had no human history, but it still changed. Storms passed. Seasons turned. Young animals were born and some survived. Trees fell and fed the ground. Rivers cut into stone. Mud dried under the sun. Tracks appeared and disappeared. A place could be full of life in the morning and leave almost no sign by night. Another place could hold one footprint long enough for time to cover it and preserve it far into the future. But in the moment, there was no message. There was only life happening. Before humans ruled the world, Earth did not know it was ancient. It did not know it was beautiful. It did not know it was dangerous. Those are words that would come later. The older Earth was quieter than our stories, but not silent. It was wider than our maps, but not lost. It was alive without being named, complete without being owned, and already moving through a history that no human voice had begun to tell. If no human eyes watched the ancient world, how can we know that it was there at all? The answer is not found in memory, because memory had not yet become human memory. It is found in quieter things, in marks that did not mean to last. Mud could take the shape of a foot for a short time. Sand could settle over shells. Ash could fall across leaves and small bodies after a fire or eruption. Pollen could sink into lake beds and remain there long after the plants that made it were gone. Bones could be covered by sediment, slowly changed by minerals, and kept inside stone while the living animal disappeared completely. Before humans ruled the world, Earth was already leaving evidence, but not because it wanted to be understood. A track in soft ground was only a track. A buried tooth was only a tooth. A layer of old soil was only the surface of a former place. The meaning came much later, when human minds learned to read these signs carefully and slowly. This is why the world before us must be imagined with humility. We are not listening to a witness who remembers everything. We are looking at fragments. Most days vanished without leaving anything we can hold. A storm passed, and its sound disappeared. A bird called from a branch, and the air closed behind it. An animal slept under trees, woke, moved away, and left no record. A flood carried leaves, bones, and mud downstream, then rearranged the ground so completely that the earlier surface was lost. Countless lives began and ended without becoming fossils, without becoming tracks, without becoming part of any later story. The ancient world was real in every moment, but only a small part of it survived as evidence. That makes the past more honest, not less powerful. It reminds us not to fill every darkness with invention. We can say that forests grew because pollen, plant remains, and rock layers show that they did. We can say that animals moved through certain places because bones and footprints tell us they were there. We can say that climates changed because ice, sediments, shells, and other records preserve traces of older conditions. But we cannot pretend to know every colour of every sunrise or every movement inside every forest. The world before humans ruled it was larger than the pieces we recover. It was not a neat story waiting in the ground. It was a living planet that left behind only scattered pages. Still, those scattered pages are enough to change the way we see ourselves. They show that Earth did not begin with human attention. It had mornings before names, rivers before maps, animals before myths, and seasons before calendars. It had places where life gathered thickly and places where life was thin. It had wet years, dry years, cold stretches, warm stretches, growth, hunger, birth, injury, and death. None of these things needed to be remembered by a person in order to matter to the creatures living through them. A dry season mattered to an animal looking for water. A fallen tree mattered to insects and fungi. A muddy shore mattered to bodies that came to drink. A changing climate mattered to plants that could spread or retreat. Before human rule, meaning did not rise from words. It rose from relationships between living things and the conditions around them. This is the second step in entering that older world. We must accept that it was both deeply alive and mostly unrecoverable. It was full of ordinary moments that no science can replay exactly, and yet it was not lost completely. It remains in stone, soil, ice, bone, shell, pollen, and the shapes of land. The ancient Earth did not speak, but it did leave traces. And those traces tell us that before humans made history, the world was already passing through time, quietly recording itself in ways no voice could control. To enter the world before humans ruled it, we have to put down one of our oldest habits, the habit of placing ourselves in the middle of every scene. A hill was not waiting to become a lookout. A river was not waiting to become a route. A cave was not waiting to become shelter. A tree was not waiting to become wood for a fire. These things became useful to humans much later. But before us, they belonged to their own conditions. The hill met wind, rain, roots, and erosion. The river carried water, minerals, leaves, and bodies toward lower ground. The cave held darkness, cold air, damp stone, small animals, and the slow drip of water. The tree stood inside a web of light, soil, insects, fungi, and seasons. Nothing in that older world was empty because it had not yet been used by people. It was only free from human purpose. This is difficult because human purpose is how we survive. Our ancestors had to notice what could help or harm them. A sharp stone could become a tool. A branch could become fuel. A footprint could become a clue. A fruit could become food. A rise in the land could become safety. This way of seeing was powerful, and over time it helped humans change the earth deeply. But if we use that same way of seeing for the world before humans, we quietly turn the ancient earth into a waiting room for ourselves. We begin to imagine forests as future timber, plains as future hunting grounds, rivers as future pathways, and animals as future prey. That is not the world as it was. That is the world seen backward through human need. Before human rule, Earth did not have a center in the way human stories often do. Life spread wherever it could. Some places were crowded with growth. Some were bare, cold, dry, or hard to live in. Some animals were strong for a time and then gone. Some plants spread when the climate helped them, then retreated when conditions changed. A coastline could move. A valley could fill with water, or dry into open ground. A forest could rise, burn, recover, or disappear. None of this happened to prepare a home for us. It happened because the planet was active, and life was always answering the conditions around it. This does not make the ancient world meaningless. It makes its meaning wider. A dead animal mattered to scavengers, insects, microbes, and soil. A fallen tree mattered to fungi, beetles, roots, and the shade below it. A stream mattered to every body that came to drink, even if no one named it. A season of drought mattered to plants that could not grow and animals that had to move. Meaning existed as connection, not explanation. The world was full of consequences, but not human stories. It was full of relationships, but not ownership. It was full of change, but not memory as we know it. So the first part of this journey ends with a quiet correction. The world before humans ruled it was not a silent, empty place waiting for our arrival. It was an old, living earth without our voice. It had no maps, no borders, no fires, no tools, no names, and no written memory. But it had rivers, forests, shorelines, storms, insects, animals, soil, death, birth, hunger, shelter, and time. It had everything a living planet needed to continue being itself. And once we understand that, we can move deeper, from the absence of human eyes to the age of the planet beneath them. Because when humans finally appeared, they did not step onto a young Earth. They stepped onto a world already ancient, beyond ordinary imagination. When humans finally appeared, they did not arrive on a young planet. They arrived on a world that had already been changing for a length of time almost impossible to feel. A human life can make 70 or 80 years feel large. A few thousand years can make a ruin, a language, or an old story seem ancient. But Earth had already carried oceans, rocks, storms, mountains, and living things for ages far deeper than any human memory. Long before a hand shaped a stone tool, the ground itself had been lifted and broken. Long before a voice named a river, rivers had already cut into land, carried sand, changed course, and worn stone into smaller pieces. Long before anyone stood on a shore and wondered what lay beyond the water, seas had moved over lowlands and later withdrawn again. The world before humans ruled, it was not a fresh stage waiting for footsteps. It was an old planet with old surfaces, old scars, and old changes hidden beneath every place that would later seem familiar. A valley that future humans might cross could once have been underwater. A cliff could hold layers made from ancient mud, shells, or sand. A mountain that looked permanent could be the result of slow forces pressing land upward, while rain, frost, and wind slowly carried it away grain by grain. To the human eye, a landscape can feel still because our lives are brief. But the older Earth was never truly still. It only moved at speeds too slow for ordinary attention. Continents shifted across the planet. Oceans opened and narrowed. Coastlines changed their shape. Rivers made valleys, abandoned old paths, and found new ones. Ice could spread over land in colder ages and later melt back. Heat, pressure, water, and time worked together without any need for human purpose. This matters for the question of what the world was like before humans ruled it, because the world was not simply nature before people. It was nature with a long history of its own. The land was already layered with earlier worlds. A dry plain might rest above the remains of an old seabed. A forest might grow where another kind of landscape had once stood. A river might flow through rock that was formed under conditions completely different from the present air above it. Every surface was temporary, even if it lasted longer than any creature living on it. Before humans drew borders, Earth had already redrawn itself many times. Before people spoke of homeland, the ground beneath any possible home had already belonged to sea, swamp, forest, desert, ice, or open water in different ages. This older planet did not change in order to prepare a place for us. It changed because that is what an active planet does. Volcanoes released heat from within, water moved downward through gravity, wind carried dust, rain softened rock, roots entered cracks. Dead plants and animals became part of soil or sediment. Small changes gathered slowly until they shaped large things. No one watched most of this happen. No one counted the years. No one said that an age had ended and another had begun. Yet the changes were real, and they shaped the world that later humans would enter. When our ancestors finally looked across rivers, forests, coasts, and open ground, they were seeing only the latest face of a much older Earth. Beneath their feet were histories they could not know, vanished seas, buried forests, old volcanic ash, broken stone, and the remains of creatures that had passed away long before any human story began. To understand the world before human rule, we must first feel that depth. We must imagine a planet not waiting, not empty, not young, but already ancient. A planet that had been making and unmaking places for an immense stretch of time before any human eye looked out and called one small part of it home. A place can seem permanent when we stand inside it for only one lifetime. A coast looks like the edge of the world. A river looks as if it has always known where to go. A forest seems rooted in its own forever. But before humans ruled the earth, these places were not fixed in the way human memory makes them feel. They were temporary shapes in a much longer movement. A shore could move inland when seas rose, covering low ground that had once held plants, mud, or animals. Later, when water withdrew, the same area could become dry land again, open to wind, rain, roots, and feet. A river could cut slowly through rock for ages, then change its course after floods, landslides, or changes in the slope of the land. A lake could shrink into marsh, then into grass, then vanish under a drier climate. A desert could hide the traces of older water. A plain could carry the memory of a swamp. The world before human rule was not a single picture. It was a planet whose surfaces kept becoming something else. This is difficult to feel because human beings build meaning around stable places. We remember a valley as home, a shore as a border, a mountain as a marker, a river as a path. Yet Earth's older changes did not follow our need for stability. Climate warmed and cooled. Rainfall shifted. Ice spread in some ages and retreated in others. When ice held more of the planet's water, sea levels could fall, exposing land that had once been under the ocean. When ice melted, seas could rise again and cover low places. A passage for animals in one age might become seabed in another. An island might join a larger landmass, then separate again. No one was there to call it loss or discovery. There was only water moving, temperature changing, land appearing, land disappearing, and life answering whatever conditions came next. For living things, these slow changes were not ideas. They were the shape of survival. If a region became wetter, plants could spread, insects could multiply, and animals that fed on that growth might find new chances. If a region became drier, water sources could shrink, plants could thin, and animals might have to move, adapt, or disappear. If cold spread, some forests could retreat while more open ground appeared. If warmth returned, other plants and animals could expand again. None of this happened everywhere at the same time. While one place dried, another place might grow wetter. While one coast was covered, another might expose new land. Earth before humans was not one weather, one forest, one ice age, or one kind of wilderness. It was many changing worlds at once, each shaped by local water, temperature, soil, landform, and living things. This matters because later humans often see the land as something to claim, cross, map, or manage. But before us, the land was still answering forces older than any claim. A tree line could move over generations. Grassland could open where forest had been thinner. Wet ground could gather dead plant matter and hold it for long periods. Floods could lay down new sediment. Wind could move dust from one region to another. Even the soil beneath future human feet was not a simple surface. It was made slowly from weathered rock, dead life, water, roots, and time. When our ancestors finally entered such places, they saw the latest version of the land, not the whole story beneath it. They saw rivers, hills, coasts, and forests as present realities, because that was all any living body could meet directly. But beneath those present realities were older shores, older climates, older waters, and older silences. To understand the world before humans ruled it, we have to imagine change that is quiet enough to look like stillness. The earth was not waiting in one form for people to arrive. It was moving, slowly and continually, through forms that rose, faded, returned, and vanished, long before there was anyone to draw a map or say where the world began and ended. By the time humans entered the storm with the war, Earth had already carried more past than any human mind could easily hold. Every place that looked simple on the surface had older layers beneath it. A riverbank was not only mud and water, it could be the newest edge of a valley shaped by long erosion, older floods, buried sediments, and changes in climate. A forest floor was not only leaves and roots. It could rest above soil made from weathered rock, dead plants, older fires, old rains, and the quiet work of small living things. A coast was not only the place where land met sea, it could be the latest position of an edge that had moved many times as water rose and fell. This is why the world before humans ruled it cannot be understood as one still ancient scene. It was already a layered world, and humans arrived late, walking over surfaces that had been made by time they could not see. Our ancestors may have known a certain hill, a certain river crossing, a certain grove, or a certain open plain, but they could not know how old those places truly were. They saw what any living creature sees first: shelter, water, danger, food, distance, weather, and the movement of other bodies. Beneath that immediate world was a deeper earth, shaped by vanished seas, old climates, buried forests, volcanic ash, ancient soils, and stone broken down slowly into ground. The human body met the present, but the present was built from the past. This gives the ancient world a quiet weight. It means that before we made maps, the land already held records. Before we made stories, the rocks and soils already contained older stories in a physical form. Before we counted years, ice, sediment, shells, pollen, and fossils had already kept traces of earlier conditions. These traces were not written for us. They were simply what remained when life, water, heat, cold, and time passed through matter. A shell buried in old seabed, a seed preserved in mud, a footprint hardened under sediment, a layer of ash between older and younger ground. Each one is a small doorway into a world that existed without human voices. Yet, even these doorways are limited. They do not give us every morning, every animal, every storm, or every sound. They remind us that the past was much larger than the evidence that survived. To speak honestly about the world before human rule is to respect both what we can know and what we cannot know. We can know that Earth was ancient before us. We can know that landscapes changed. We can know that climates shifted and living things responded. But we should not pretend the planet was moving toward humans as a final goal. The older Earth had no such plan. It made forests, seas, deserts, swamps, reefs, ice, plains, and mountains because conditions allowed those forms to rise for a time. Some lasted long, some disappeared, some returned in different ways. Life followed these changes, not with intention, but through survival, reproduction, movement, and chance. When humans finally came, they entered this ongoing motion. They did not end it at once, and they did not understand it fully. At first, they were simply one more living form trying to endure inside a world already old. The river was older than their path beside it. The stone was older than the hand that lifted it. The night was older than the fire that would one day push it back. The forest was older than any name spoken under its branches. This is the lesson that carries us forward. Before humans ruled the world, Earth was not young, empty, or waiting. It was layered, active, and ancient, with every living surface resting on older change. And if we now move closer to that surface, away from the deep movement of stone, sea, and climate, we begin to see the green worlds that covered so much of the land: forests, swamps, roots, insects, fungi, damp soil, fallen leaves, and the quiet breathing systems that made life possible long before any human hand reached toward them. Long before any human hand cut a branch, carried a seed, or cleared a path through trees, the green world had already been shaping the land in quiet ways. Forests grew where light, water, soil, and climate allowed them to grow. Wet places gathered reeds, mosses, roots, and fallen leaves. Open areas held grasses, low plants, ferns, shrubs, and seeds waiting for the right season. No one called these places useful. No one called them wild. They were simply living surfaces, made by sunlight entering leaves, roots entering ground, water moving through soil, and old life returning slowly into new life. Before humans ruled the world, plants were among the great powers of Earth, not because they moved quickly, but because they changed everything around them by staying, growing, falling, and returning. A bare slope and a rooted slope are not the same place. Roots hold soil. Leaves soften rain before it strikes the ground. Shade keeps some places cool and damp. Fallen branches become shelter for insects and fungi. Dead leaves gather into a floor where small lives work unseen. A forest before human eyes was not scenery. It was a system, layered from the dark soil to the highest branches, and each layer made room for another kind of life. Beneath the trees, the ground was busy in a slow way. Fungi spread through wood and soil, breaking down what had fallen. Tiny organisms worked through dead matter too small for larger animals to use. Insects moved under bark, through leaf litter, inside stems, and across wet ground. Worms and other small creatures opened spaces in the soil where air and water could pass. A fallen trunk might feed beetles, hold moisture, grow moss, shelter small animals, and finally soften into the ground that would feed new roots. Nothing in this older world was wasted in the human sense. A dead thing did not simply disappear. It entered another process. It became food, shelter, soil, or a path for new growth. This is one reason the world before humans was already full, even when no large animal was visible. Much of its life was close to the ground, hidden in shade, or spread thinly through damp earth. Wetlands were especially important in this older green world. A marsh or swamp could look still from far away, but inside it water, mud, plants, insects, fish, amphibians, birds, and small animals could all be tied together. Dead plant matter might gather in dark layers, because water slowed decay. Seeds could wait in mud. Roots could bind soft ground. Seasonal floods could bring nutrients, move sediments, and create new edges where land and water met. Before humans drained wetlands, crossed them, feared them, or used them, these places already had their own order. They held water in the land. They fed many small lives. They created shelter and danger at the same time. A drinking animal might find water there, but a predator might also wait nearby. A bird might nest among reeds. Insects might rise in clouds after warm, wet days. The wet ground was not empty difficulty. It was one of the ways Earth kept life gathered. To understand what the world was like before humans ruled it, we have to give these green systems their proper weight. The ancient world was not only made of giant animals and open skies, it was also made of leaves turning light into food, roots holding earth, fungi softening death, insects connecting plants and animals, and wetlands storing the memory of seasons in mud. Every larger creature depended on this quieter world, even if it never noticed. A plant-eater needed leaves, seeds, stems, or grasses. A predator needed the plant-eaters. A scavenger needed the fallen bodies. Soil needed the return of what had lived. Before human hands began choosing which plants mattered, the green world was already choosing nothing and supporting many things at once. It had no farms, no gardens, no borders, and no owners. Yet it fed, sheltered, shaped, and renewed the land, long before anyone stood beneath a tree and gave it a name. Much of the world before humans ruled it was held together by lives too small or too quiet to dominate the eye. A person standing in a forest often notices trunks, branches, shade, birds, or the movement of larger animals, but the older work of the forest happened lower down, in the damp places where leaves softened, roots searched, insects fed, and fungi spread through darkness. Before any human hand turned soil with a tool, soil was already being made by the slow meeting of rock, water, air, dead matter, and living bodies. Rain broke small particles from stone. Heat and cold opened cracks. Roots entered those cracks and widened them over time. Leaves fell, stems broke, animals died, and their remains became part of the ground through the work of organisms that did not need to be seen. In this hidden world, death was not an ending that left emptiness behind. It was a passage into other forms of life. Fungi were among the quiet workers of that passage. They entered fallen wood, dead leaves, and buried matter with fine threads, breaking down what many animals could not eat directly. Some fungi lived in close connection with plant roots, helping plants take in water and minerals while receiving food made from sunlight. This exchange was not a story of kindness. It was a relationship that worked because both sides could continue through it. In the world before human rule, such relationships were everywhere. A root needed soil, water, and living partners below ground. A tree needed leaves above and hidden support below. An insect needed bark, sap, flowers, dung, dead flesh, or other insects. A bird or small reptile might need insects. A larger animal might need the plants that depended on soil. The whole system rested on connections that no single creature controlled. Insects made this older world busy in a different way. They crawled under bark, chewed leaves, bored into wood, carried pollen, broke down dung, fed on dead bodies, and became food for countless other animals. Some were destructive to individual plants, but even that destruction belonged to the wider movement of life. A tree weakened by insects might fall, opening light for young growth. A dead animal broken apart by insects and microbes returned more quickly to the land. Flowers and later plant groups depended in many cases on small moving bodies to carry pollen from one place to another. Even when insects were tiny, their combined presence could shape whole habitats. Before humans ruled the world, the smallest movers often helped decide how energy passed through the living surface of Earth. Wet soil and mud were also full of quiet meaning. To a later human, mud might be difficulty, a place where the foot sinks, where a path becomes slow, where shelter is needed. But before humans, mud was a meeting place. It held water for roots. It received footprints for a moment. It kept seeds wet. It sheltered eggs, larvae, worms, microbes, and small burrowing lives. At the edge of a pool or marsh, mud could be crossed by many bodies in a single day. Insects, amphibians, reptiles, birds, small mammals in later ages, and larger animals coming to drink. Most marks vanished after rain, drying, or flood. A few, under rare conditions, could be covered and preserved. But whether preserved or not, those muddy places mattered in their own present. They were where water touched land, where decay slowed or deepened, where life gathered around moisture. This helps us answer the central question more honestly. What was the world like before humans ruled it? It was not only wide landscapes and large animals, it was also a close world of surfaces. The underside of leaves, the inside of rotting wood, the wet edge of a stream, the dark space around roots, the soft floor under old trees. It was a world where matter kept changing hands, though no hands were there. A fallen leaf passed into fungi, microbes, soil, root, plant, insect, and animal. A dead body passed into scavengers, beetles, bacteria, minerals, and new growth. A seed passed through water, wind, stomach, mud, or shade, and sometimes became another plant. Before human farming, before gardens, before chosen crops, Earth already had its own deep recycling of life. Nothing in it was tidy, and nothing in it was sentimental. It was simply how living systems continued. The ancient world breathed not only through forests above ground, but through the damp, dark labour below them. The green world before human hands was not a background for larger animals. It was the ground that made larger animals possible. Everybody that walked, crawled, climbed, flew, hunted, grazed, nested, or hid depended on the quiet systems beneath it. A plant-eating animal needed leaves, stems, seeds, fruit, bark, grasses, or roots. A predator needed those plant-eaters, or smaller animals that had fed in the same living web. A scavenger needed the bodies that fell. Insects needed plants, dung, dead wood, flowers, soil, or other insects. Fungi needed fallen matter and living roots. Soil needed the return of what had once been alive. Nothing stood alone. A large creature might seem powerful as it crossed open ground, but its strength rested on older, smaller work. Rain entering soil, roots holding earth, leaves making food from light, fungi breaking down dead wood, insects moving through bark and flowers, and wetlands keeping water close to the land. In this sense, the world before humans was already organized, though not by laws, borders, or plans. It was organized by need, exchange, season, chance, and survival. A forest had layers like a quiet house without walls. The floor held old leaves, seeds, fungi, insects, damp soil, and hidden movement. Low plants grew where enough light reached them. Trunks rose upward and created shade. Branches gave resting places, nesting places, and paths above the ground. Openings made by fallen trees could let sunlight in, giving young plants a chance. A wetland had its own structure too. Reeds, mud, pools, roots, insects, fish, amphibians, birds, and soft edges where many kinds of life met. Even grasslands and open plant-covered places were not empty. They held seeds, burrows, grazing, wind, insects, soil, and seasonal change. These places had no human architecture, yet they had shelter, passages, gathering points, and limits. They had no farms, yet they produced food. They had no written rules, yet too little water, too much shade, too much cold, or too much dryness could decide what lived there. This is important for answering what the world was like before humans ruled it. It was not a simple wilderness waiting for a smarter species. It was already complex. It had balance, but balance did not mean peace. It meant many pressures meeting for a time. Growth and hunger, birth and decay, shelter and danger, wet years and dry years, old trees and new openings, animals feeding and plants recovering. The green world could be generous in one season and harsh in another. A fruiting tree could feed many mouths, then stand bare. A marsh could hold water through a dry spell, then become a place where predators and prey came close together. A fallen animal could become food for many small lives and then part of the soil. Nothing in this world needed human care to matter, and nothing waited for human use before it had value inside the living system. Later, humans would learn to change these green places. They would cut, burn, carry seeds, choose plants, clear ground, make paths, and turn some landscapes toward human need. But before that, the green world followed its own older rhythm. It spread where conditions allowed, retreated where they did not, and returned in new forms after disturbance. It made the land softer, richer, more shaded, more textured, and more full of chances for other creatures. And once forests, wetlands, soils, insects, fungi, and plant communities had shaped the surface of Earth, larger lives could move through the spaces they created. Some of those later lives were unlike anything humans would ever see alive. Great reptiles and dinosaurs would walk through plant-filled worlds, feed from them, nest within them, hide in them, and leave their marks in mud and stone. So before we enter that age, we should remember this. The giants did not appear on an empty stage. They stood on a living foundation of green, damp, patient work that had already made Earth a place where great bodies could exist. There was a long age when the land did not belong to humans, and did not yet belong to mammals in the way it would much later. The green foundations of Earth were already there in many places. Plants growing where water and climate allowed, insects moving through bark and leaves, roots holding soil, rivers feeding lowlands, and wetlands gathering life at their edges. Through these older living places moved animals whose bodies now seem strange to us, because no human being ever saw them alive. Dinosaurs and other ancient reptiles were not monsters in their own world. They were animals shaped by the same basic needs that shape all life: food, water, safety, reproduction, movement, and time. Some were large plant eaters, feeding slowly from vegetation that no human hand would ever cut. Some were smaller and quicker, staying close to cover, watching for danger, or searching for insects, plants, eggs, or small prey. Some were predators, but even predators were not symbols of cruelty. They followed hunger, they saved energy, they failed sometimes. They rested, they aged, they lived inside conditions they could not control. This is important for understanding the world before humans ruled it, because the age of dinosaurs reminds us that Earth had already held powerful forms of life long before our footsteps appeared. The ground could shake under heavy bodies, but not for us. Riverbanks could hold tracks, but not as messages. Nests could be made, guarded, or abandoned, but not as scenes in a human story. Rain fell on scales, feathers, mud, leaves, eggs, bones, and flowing water, without any person standing nearby to remember it. We often imagine this age as constant danger, full of roaring and chasing, but ordinary life was likely much slower than that. Most animals, even large and frightening ones, spend much of life feeding, waiting, resting, avoiding injury, finding water, and moving when conditions require it. A large herbivore might spend long hours eating because a large body needs much food. A smaller animal might survive by timing, speed, or hiding. A predator might rest in shade after a meal, because hunting costs strength. A nesting creature might return to a place where warmth, ground, and season gave its young a better chance. These are not dramatic details, but they make the ancient world more real. Before human rule, life was already full of routines. It had mornings, heat, thirst, hunger, mating seasons, young bodies, old bodies, injury, disease, and luck. The land itself shaped what was possible. A giant animal could not live without enough plant life or enough prey. A nesting ground could fail if flood or drought changed the place. A river could bring water and danger at the same time. Dry seasons could draw animals together near shrinking pools. Wet seasons could spread growth and open new feeding ground. The dinosaur world was not one single landscape repeated everywhere. Across the long Mesozoic era, different places held different plants, climates, coastlines, and animals. Some dinosaurs lived millions of years apart from others, in worlds that were not exactly the same. This keeps the story honest. There was not one fixed dinosaur world. There were many changing worlds, filled with different bodies at different times. Yet the deeper truth remains simple. Before humans ruled Earth, other creatures filled the land completely. They crossed plains, moved through forests, nested near rivers, followed food, avoided danger, and disappeared into time. They did not know they were ancient. They did not know they would become fossils. They did not know that one day another species would find their bones, give them names, and try to imagine their lives. In their own time, they were simply alive, and that is enough. The world before humans was not waiting for people to arrive and make it meaningful. It already held great bodies, small bodies, green places, muddy shores, warm days, dark nights, and countless ordinary lives that began and ended without a single human eye. The dinosaur world was not only made of sudden fear, it was made of long hours. It was made of bodies moving slowly through heat, shade, hunger, water, and season. A large plant eater might wake into morning light and begin feeding almost at once because size brings need. Leaves, stems, seeds, ferns, low plants, or branches could become the work of an entire day. Eating was not a small event for a great body. It was a rhythm that tied the animal to the land around it. Where plants grew thickly, life could gather. Where plants thinned, animals had to move. Some may have travelled through familiar ranges, following food and water as conditions changed. Others may have stayed closer to certain places if those places continued to provide enough. Before humans ruled the world, movement was not guided by roads or maps. It was guided by hunger, smell, memory of place in animal bodies, seasonal change, and the pressure to survive. Water shaped much of this movement. A river, lake edge, floodplain, or muddy pool could draw many animals into the same area. Plant eaters came to drink. Smaller creatures came for insects, shelter, or wet ground. Predators could learn that thirsty animals returned to certain places. And but this did not make the water a stage for constant violence. More often, it was simply a necessary place. Feet pressed into mud, tails passed over reeds, insects rose from damp edges. A young animal stayed near a larger body. Another stood still, listening. A predator waited or moved away. Many moments would have passed with nothing dramatic happening at all. The ancient world was full of alertness. But alertness is not the same as panic. It is the ordinary state of living where danger exists. Nests and young animals also belong to this world. Fossil evidence shows that some dinosaurs laid eggs, and some nesting sites suggest repeated use of certain places by some species. We should not turn this into a modern family story, because different species likely cared for young in different ways, and much remains uncertain. But it is safe to say that reproduction was part of their ordinary world. Eggs needed suitable ground and conditions. Young bodies were vulnerable. Growth took time. A creature that would one day become large began small enough to be exposed to hunger, accident, weather, and predators. This makes the ancient land feel less like a world of giants only, and more like a world of stages. Eggs, young, growing animals, adults, aging bodies, and fallen bodies returning to the system. Even the strongest animal began in weakness. Even the largest body could become food after death. Before humans ruled Earth, no creature escaped the common pattern of life passing through need and return. The plants and climates around dinosaurs were not fixed either. Across the long span of their age, different plant communities spread in different times and places. Some landscapes held conifers, cycads, ferns, horsetails, and other ancient plants. Later, flowering plants became increasingly important in many ecosystems. This means that the food, cover, nesting places, and insect life around dinosaurs were also changing. A plant-eater's world depended on what grew within reach. A predator's world depended on the animals supported by that growth. A small creature's world depended on cracks, roots, shade, burrows, or quick movement through cover. No life stood above the whole system. A huge body could dominate one clearing, but it could not command rain. A sharp-toothed animal could hunt, but it could not make prey abundant. A nest could be placed in a promising place, but it could not guarantee survival. The world before humans ruled it was powerful because it was interconnected. It had no rulers in the human sense, only relationships that held for a time. To imagine that world calmly, we should picture not one chase, but many ordinary scenes. A herd-like gathering moving near water, a small feathered animal slipping through plants, a heavy body resting under shade, eggs warming in buried or open nests depending on species, insects feeding on dung and dead matter, rain softening tracks, sunlight drying mud, and night covering everything without a fire in the dark. These lives were not waiting to become fossils. They were complete while they were happening. The dinosaur world had no human witness, but it had its own fullness. Eating, resting, nesting, growing, hiding, hunting, failing, surviving, and passing away. That is what the Earth was like before humans ruled it, not a monster world, but a living world where other creatures filled time with their own ordinary needs. The age of dinosaurs was long, but it was not endless. That may be the quietest lesson of this part of Earth's story. A form of life can fill land for millions upon millions of years and still not remain forever. Large bodies can become common, successful, and deeply fitted to their world, yet still depend on conditions beyond their control. Food must keep growing. Water must remain reachable. Climate must stay within certain limits. Eggs must survive. Young animals must live long enough to reproduce. Prey must be present for predators. Plants must be present for plant eaters. Before humans ruled the world, no creature could step outside these rules. Dinosaurs were powerful within their own time, but they were still held by the planet that carried them. They lived through changing landscapes, changing climates, changing coastlines, and changing plant communities. Some kinds appeared, spread, and vanished long before others existed. The dinosaur age was not one single world frozen in place. It was a long series of worlds, and each one had its own animals, plants, rivers, shores, and dangers. Then, near the end of the Cretaceous, Earth changed in a way many forms of life could not survive. The event that ended the non-avian dinosaurs was not simply the disappearance of a few large animals. It was a major disruption of living systems. Light, food chains, climate, land, sea, and survival were all affected in complex ways. We should speak carefully here, because no one witnessed it with human eyes. But the evidence supports a great extinction, one that removed many groups while leaving others to continue. Birds, which are the living descendants of theropod dinosaurs, survived. Some mammals survived. Many plants, insects, reptiles, amphibians, fishes, and other forms of life continued in changed worlds. The Earth did not become empty. It became different. That difference matters deeply when we ask what the world was like before humans ruled it. It tells us that Earth had known dominance before us, and it had also known the end of dominance before us. No human empire, city, tool, or field existed yet, but the planet had already carried whole ages of life and then turned into something new. A riverbank that once held dinosaur tracks might later become stone. A bone might rest under sediment while forests above changed again and again. A nesting ground might disappear beneath erosion, water, or new layers of earth. The animals themselves did not know they belonged to a famous age. They did not know they would become fossils. They did not know that far in the future, another species would uncover their remains and try to give shape to their lost bodies. In their own time, they lived in the present, as animals do. They felt hunger, heat, thirst, injury, fatigue, instinct, and danger. When the world changed too sharply, many could not continue. This is not a moral story. It is not punishment. It is not failure in the human sense. It is the hard truth of life on a changing planet. Survival always depends on the meeting between body and world. When that meeting breaks, even strong forms can pass away. After the great loss, silence did not mean the end of life. It meant the beginning of a different balance. The survivors moved through a world with open spaces in its living web. Small mammals that had lived alongside dinosaurs did not instantly become rulers, but over long stretches of time their descendants would diversify. Birds would fill skies, shores, forests, and open ground in many forms. Plants and insects would continue their long relationships. Reptiles would continue too, though the land no longer belonged to the great non-avian dinosaurs. The world after them was not a clean beginning. It was built from what remained: seeds, roots, small bodies, hidden nests, surviving lineages, rivers, weather, soil, and time. So as this age closes, we should not imagine only an ending. We should imagine Earth carrying absence forward. The great bodies were gone, but the planet kept turning. Rain still fell. Rivers still cut into land. Plants still grew where they could. Small animals still searched for food in the shade. The world before humans ruled it had already learned how to lose one age and begin another without knowing that anything had been lost. After many of the great dinosaurs were gone, the world did not become empty. It did not fall silent in a simple way. It changed. That difference is important, because extinction can make us imagine a blank earth, a dead pause, a place waiting to be filled again. But life rarely works like that. Even after a great loss, some roots remain, some seeds wait, some small bodies hide, feed, breed, and continue. Some birds survive in altered skies. And see, Macon, some mammals survive close to the ground, in darkness, cover, burrows, trees, or broken landscapes. Some reptiles continue along rivers, coasts, wetlands, and warm places. Insects remain tied to plants, dead matter, soil, and one another. Fungi keep working through fallen wood and buried remains. The Earth after the giants was not the same Earth as before, but it was still a living planet. Rain still moved through valleys. Rivers still carried mud. Ash and dust settled. Plants returned where conditions allowed them. The first green after disaster may have been low, patchy, and uneven in many places, but even uneven life is still life. Before humans ruled the world, Earth had already passed through loss and recovery without a human witness. No one stood there to call it recovery. No one marked the first returning growth as hope. A fern, a seedling, a surviving insect, or a small animal moving under cover did not know it was part of a new age. It was simply trying to continue. This is one of the most honest ways to imagine the world after the great reptiles faded from dominance. Not as a triumphant beginning, and not as endless ruin, but as a slow rearranging of what remained. The spaces once filled by large non-avian dinosaurs did not instantly belong to mammals or birds as if a throne had been handed over. Empty space in nature is not a room with a door. It is a set of changed conditions. Food sources change, predators vanish or become fewer, plants recover in different patterns, small animals find fewer dangers in some places and new dangers in others. Bodies that had once lived at the edges of a world can begin to spread when the pressures around them change. Over long stretches of time, descendants of survivors move into new ways of living. Some become larger, some stay small, some climb, dig, glide, swim, hunt, graze, or feed at night. Each change depends on many ordinary things: teeth, limbs, temperature, food, shelter, reproduction, and chance. The world before humans ruled it was not guided by a plan toward us. It was guided by survival under new conditions. If a small mammal could find food, avoid danger, and leave young behind, its line might continue. If a bird could feed in a changed forest or along a shore, its line might continue. If a plant could return after disturbance, it could begin to shape the ground again. Slowly the living web became different. What had been closed became open. What had been common became rare or gone. What had been hidden sometimes became more important. This is why the silence after the giants should be heard carefully. The ME, it was not an empty silence. It was the quiet of small things working. Roots entering new soil, insects moving through low plants, small mammals searching under leaves, birds crossing the air in forms that would diversify across time, reptiles warming themselves near water, microbes and fungi returning fallen bodies to the ground. The old world did not return exactly. A new world began from remains, not from nothing. And long before humans appeared, Earth had already shown that life can lose a dominant form and still continue by changing shape. In the world after the great dinosaurs were gone, smallness could become a kind of strength. It was not strength in the dramatic sense. It did not mean ruling the land or defeating the past. It meant needing less food, finding shelter in smaller spaces, hiding when danger moved nearby, breeding in ways that allowed a line to continue, and using parts of the world that larger bodies could not use as easily. Small mammals had already lived for a long time while dinosaurs filled many large roles on land. They were not new arrivals after the extinction. They had been there, often in the margins, in darkness, under cover, inside burrows, among roots, in trees, or close to the ground. After the Great Disruption, some of the old pressures changed. Many large predators and plant-eaters were gone. Plant communities were disturbed and then began to recover in new patterns. Food webs had to rebuild from what remained. In that changed world, small surviving animals did not understand that opportunity had opened. They only met conditions: a seed to eat, an insect to catch, a hollow to hide in, a safe place to give birth, a night with fewer dangers than before. Over long stretches of time, these ordinary chances mattered. A body that could live on varied foods had an advantage in uncertain places. A body that could stay warm, move at night, climb, dig, or hide could endure where more specialized bodies might fail. A line that survived one difficult generation could leave descendants for the next. This is how new worlds are built after loss, not by sudden conquest, but by repeated survival. Birds also carried the dinosaur story forward in a different form. They were not outsiders replacing dinosaurs. They were part of the dinosaur lineage that continued. Some survived, and over time their descendants spread into many ways of living. Some fed near water. Some moved through forests. Some searched open ground. Some later became strong flyers, swimmers, runners, singers, hunters, or seed-eaters. But in the early world after the extinction, they too were simply living creatures answering the conditions around them. A bird did not know it represented survival. It knew hunger, shelter, mating, nesting, weather, and danger in the way a body knows them. Reptiles continued as well, along rivers, wetlands, warm shores, and dry ground where their bodies could meet the climate. Insects continued their small but immense work with plants, dead matter, soil, and other animals. Plants recovered unevenly, and where they returned, they began again to make shelter, shade, food, and soil. The New World was not built by one group alone. It was built by many survivors, each carrying a small part of life through a broken time. This helps us answer the central question more carefully. What was the world like before humans ruled it? It was a world where the future often belonged to creatures that seemed unimportant at first. The small, the hidden, the quiet, and the adaptable could outlast forms that looked far more powerful. A tiny mammal in cover, a bird in a recovering forest, an insect in dead wood, a seed in disturbed soil, a fungus working through fallen matter. These were not grand images, but they were part of the planet's continuation. Earth did not choose winners with human judgment. It did not reward size, beauty, terror, or fame. It allowed whatever could continue under the conditions present at the time. That is colder than a comforting story, but also calmer and more truthful. The world after the giants was a world of testing, rebuilding, and uneven return. It was full of gaps, but also full of small movements into those gaps. It was not empty. It was not waiting for humans. It was already beginning another long experiment in life, one carried forward by survivors that moved softly through the remains of a vanished age. The world after the great dinosaurs did not return to what it had been. It could not. Extinction does not reset the earth like a clean page. It leaves remains, openings, losses, and survivors, and from those things a different world begins to take shape. Forests did not grow back everywhere in the same way. Some places recovered sooner, others more slowly. Some plants spread into disturbed ground, while others waited for conditions that suited them. Insects followed plants, dead matter, warmth, moisture, and each other. Birds moved through the air and across recovering lands in forms that would change greatly over time. Mammals, still small in many early forms, found ways to live in spaces that had once been more dangerous or less available. Reptiles continued near water, in warm regions, and in habitats that still suited their bodies. The planet did not choose one group to replace another. It allowed many kinds of survivors to continue, and over deep time those survivors reshaped the living world. This is important because we often imagine history as a line of winners. First one group rules, then another. Dinosaurs vanish, mammals rise, humans arrive. But the real Earth was less simple and much slower. Mammals did not wake one morning as rulers of the land. Birds did not instantly fill every sky. Forests did not return as a single green blanket. Life rebuilt unevenly, place by place, generation by generation. A small mammal that found insects under leaves was not thinking about the future of mammals. A bird nesting in a recovering landscape was not carrying a symbol of survival. A seed sprouting in ash or disturbed soil was not trying to heal the world. Yet each small continuation mattered. The new Earth was made from millions of such ordinary acts. Feeding, hiding, growing, nesting, reproducing, dying, and returning to the soil. Before humans ruled the world, this was how great change often happened. Not as a clear announcement, but as countless small lives continuing after a large silence. Over time, the living web became richer again, but it became rich in a different way. Some mammals grew larger. Some became better climbers, diggers, swimmers, runners, or hunters. Some stayed small and survived by remaining hidden. Birds diversified across forests, shores, wetlands, and open ground. Plants and insects continued to shape each other in complex ways, especially as flowering plants became more important in many places. Grasslands would later spread in some regions, changing the lives of animals that fed and moved across more open ground. None of this was one sudden transformation. It was the slow result of bodies meeting conditions over immense time. Food changed, and teeth changed. Habitats changed, and limbs, senses, and behaviors changed. Climate shifted, and ranges expanded or shrank. The world before humans was always becoming new, but it became new without knowing it. This is the quiet ending of the age after the giants. It was not an empty age. It was a rebuilding age, a testing age, an age of small survivors becoming the ancestors of larger stories. The great non-avian dinosaurs were gone, but their absence did not make Earth less alive. It made room for different forms of life to become more visible. Still, we should not turn this into a story that leads too quickly to ourselves. Humans were still far away. No one had made a fire for warmth. No one had shaped a spear, carved a shelter, followed a trail with spoken names, or looked at a bone and wondered what kind of creature it had been. The Earth was still living without human questions. It was filling its spaces with birds, mammals, reptiles, insects, plants, fungi, rivers, seasons, and soil. The world before us had already survived the loss of giants and begun again in another form. And from that long recovery we can now move into a quieter but deeply important chapter, the rise of mammals, birds, and new ways of living on a planet still untouched by human rule. After the world changed from the age of great dinosaurs, mammals and birds became more visible parts of life on land, in trees, near water, and across open ground. They did not appear from nowhere, and they did not rise like rulers taking a throne. They were survivors and descendants, living through the same ordinary pressures that had always shaped life: food, shelter, danger, reproduction, climate, and chance. Some mammals remained small and hidden, moving through leaves, burrows, branches, or night. Others, over long periods of time, became larger and entered roles that had once belonged to very different animals. Some developed bodies suited for running. Some became climbers. Some lived near water. Some fed on insects, seeds, fruit, leaves, meat, or many kinds of food, when conditions demanded flexibility. Birds also spread into many forms, filling forests, shorelines, wetlands, cliffs, and open spaces with movement. Their bodies carried the deeper history of dinosaurs, but their later lives belonged to changing worlds of branches, air, nests, songs, water, and migration. Before humans ruled the Earth, the planet was slowly filling with new ways of being alive. This does not mean the world became gentle. It only became different. A small mammal under leaves still faced cold, hunger, snakes, birds of prey, larger mammals, disease, and the difficulty of finding enough food. A bird in a tree still had to build or find a safe nesting place, protect eggs or young when its species did so, search for food, avoid predators, and endure storms. A grazing animal on open ground still had to keep moving between food and water. A hunter still had to spend energy carefully, because not every chase or strike could succeed. The world before human rule remained a place where bodies survived only when they met the conditions around them. Yet these new forms of life changed the feeling of the land. Mammals with fur, warm bodies, milk for their young, varied teeth, and flexible behaviors could live in many ways. Birds could move between places in the air, carrying seeds, feeding on insects, nesting in heights, or traveling with seasons. Together with plants, insects, fungi, rivers, and climate, they helped shape the living surface of the planet in ways that would later feel more familiar to human eyes, though humans were still far away. Forests held climbing mammals, nesting birds, insects, fruit, leaves, and hidden hunters. Wetlands held wading birds, small mammals, reptiles, fish, frogs, insects, and thick plant growth. Open lands supported grazing, running, watching, chasing, and hiding in grass or low cover. In each place, life answered the same quiet question: can this body continue here? If the answer was yes for enough generations, a way of living could spread. If the answer became no, it narrowed or ended. This was the ancient world after the giants, not empty, not simple, and not waiting for people, but increasingly full of forms that tested many possibilities. Some animals lived by speed, some by patience, some by numbers, some by sharp senses, some by climbing away from danger, some by digging into safety, some by eating almost anything available, some by following seasons across wide spaces. None of these lives had human meaning yet. A bird crossing the sky was not a sign. A mammal track in mud was not a clue for a hunter. A herd moving across open ground was not a resource. These meanings would come later, when humans entered the scene with memory, tools, fire, and language. Before that, mammals and birds belonged only to the older Earth, to its weather, plants, waters, dangers, and opportunities. They were not preparing the world for us. They were living their own time, one generation after another, while the planet continued to change beneath them. As mammals and birds spread into more ways of living, the Earth before humans began to feel, in some places, closer to the world we might recognize, though it was still completely without human rule. Forests were no longer only green systems of leaves, roots, insects, fungi, and shade. They also became homes for climbing bodies, nesting birds, small hunters, fruit eaters, seed eaters, and animals that moved quietly through branches or undergrowth. A tree could feed insects, shelter birds, drop fruit for mammals, hold nests above danger, and return fallen leaves to the soil below. A forest floor could be crossed by small feet at night, scratched by animals searching for roots or insects, and marked briefly by tracks that rain might erase before morning. In these places, life was layered. Some creatures lived high in branches, some stayed near the ground, some moved between the two, some followed fruiting seasons, some followed insects, some followed the animals that fed on both. Before humans entered such forests, no one called them resources, sacred groves, dark woods, or hunting grounds. They were simply living places where many needs met under the same canopy. Wetlands and river edges held another kind of richness. Water brought plants, insects, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals into close contact. A muddy bank could hold drinking tracks, crawling marks, fallen feathers, broken reeds, and the remains of shells or small bones. Birds might feed in shallow water, probing mud or catching small moving life. Mammals might come to drink, dig, swim, or search along the edge. Reptiles could warm themselves where sunlight reached open banks. Insects rose from wet places in great numbers when conditions allowed, feeding many mouths above and below the waterline. These were not peaceful places in a simple sense. They were places of need. Water gave life, but it also gathered danger. A drinking animal had to lower its head. A nesting bird had to choose cover. A small creature crossing open mud might be exposed for only a moment, but a moment could matter. The world before human rule was full of these edges, where one habitat touched another and life became dense because many paths crossed there. Open lands, too, began to matter in new ways over time. In some regions, more open vegetation and later grasslands supported animals that could graze, run, watch from a distance, or move in groups. Such places did not look like forests. They offered less cover, more sky, more wind, and different kinds of danger. A grazing animal in open ground could see farther, but it could also be seen. Speed, endurance, herd behavior, sharp senses, and timing could all become important. Birds could nest on the ground, hunt from the air, or follow the movement of insects and grazing animals. Small mammals could use burrows or low cover. Predators could rely on patience, pursuit, surprise, or strength, depending on their bodies and habitats. Before humans built roads across open land, these spaces already had routes made by water, food, and repeated animal movement. A path did not need a human foot to exist. It could be worn by hooves, paws, claws, or the seasonal return of bodies to the same water or feeding grounds. Coastlines added still another world. Tides, beaches, cliffs, marshes, shells, seabirds, fish, stranded remains, and animals that moved between land and water. Here, change was daily as well as ancient. Water advanced and retreated. Storms reshaped edges. Food could wash ashore. Birds could gather in numbers. Mammals and reptiles could use shores in different ways depending on time and place. Across all these environments, the ancient Earth was becoming more varied, not less. Mammals, birds, reptiles, insects, plants, fungi, fish, and smaller organisms were not separate decorations. They were connected through food, shelter, death, movement, and season. This is what the world was like before humans ruled it. Not one wilderness, not one forest, not one plain, but a mosaic of living places, each with its own rules, each already full of relationships before any human voice named them. The spread of mammals and birds did not make the world human, but it did make many parts of the living earth more varied in ways that later humans would one day recognize. There were bodies that ran, climbed, dug, swam, glided, nested, grazed, hunted, and moved with the seasons. There were warm-blooded animals that could remain active in cooler times or darker hours. There were mothers feeding young with milk, birds warming eggs, small creatures hiding in burrows, and herds or groups moving where food and safety allowed. None of this belonged to human history yet. No one followed the tracks with a spear. No one watched birds and turned their flight into a sign. No one named a herd, counted its members, or remembered where it had passed the year before. The world was still living without our stories. Yet it was not vague or empty. It was full of daily decisions made without words. Where to drink, where to nest, when to move, when to hide, when to feed, when to flee, when to stay still. These decisions were not planned in the human sense, but they shaped lives across generations. A mammal that could smell danger sooner might live long enough to reproduce. A bird that nested in a safer place might leave more young. An animal that could eat more than one kind of food might survive when one food became scarce. A body suited to running might do well in open ground, while another suited to climbing might live better among branches. The world before humans ruled it was filled with these small tests, repeated again and again, until whole ways of living became common, rare, or lost. This is why the age of mammals and birds should not be told as a simple rise toward us. It was not a staircase built for human arrival. It was a branching world. Some lines led to animals that still exist. Some led to forms long gone. Some became large and powerful for a time. Some remained small and hidden. Some lived near water, some in trees, some on plains, some in cold regions, some in warm forests, some in darkness. Each form answered a particular world, and when that world changed, the answer had to change too. This brings us to a larger force that stood above every animal and every plant, not as a ruler with intention, but as a condition no living body could ignore. Climate shaped where forests could stand, where grasses could spread, where ice could remain, where water could gather, and where life became thin. It shaped migration, food, breeding, shelter, and survival. A forest creature could not keep its forest if the region dried for too long. A grazer could not feed if plants failed. A bird could not nest successfully if seasons changed in ways its body could not meet. A predator could not continue where prey vanished. Before humans ruled the world, climate ruled in a deeper way than any kind ever could. It did not command with words. It changed the terms of life by changing heat, cold, rain, snow, wind, drought, ice, and season. Mammals and birds, like all life before them, lived inside those terms. They could move, adapt, endure, or disappear, but they could not step outside the planet's changing air and water. So as we leave this chapter, the living Earth feels crowded again. Forests full of calls and hidden movement, wetlands dense with wings and small tracks, open lands crossed by grazing bodies and hunters, shores alive with tides and birds. But beneath all of it was a quieter power, deciding where such worlds could exist at all. To understand the world before humans ruled it, we must now listen to that power. The slow rule of climate, older than borders, older than farming, older than any human throne. Before humans ruled the world, climate ruled without a throne. It did not speak, command, punish, or choose, but every living thing had to answer it. Heat decided where certain plants could grow. Cold decided where ice could remain. Rain decided whether a place could hold forest, grass, marsh, or dry open ground. Seasons decided when food appeared, when water gathered, when animals moved, and when young were born. A creature might be strong, fast, hidden, clever in its own animal way, or well suited to its place, but it still lived beneath the larger terms of air, water, and temperature. A forest could not stand where dryness lasted too long. A wetland could not remain without water returning often enough. Open grassland could spread where climate, soil, fire, grazing, and season made trees less dominant. Ice could cover land so completely that only certain lives could survive near its edges. Before humans made borders, climate made boundaries older and more powerful than any line on a map. These boundaries were not drawn sharply. They shifted slowly. A region could become wetter over long periods, allowing plants and animals to expand. Another could become colder, pushing some species away and favouring others better suited to open, hard or frozen places. A warmer interval could open new ground, melt ice, raise seas, and let forests move into places they had not held before. A drier age could thin vegetation, shrink lakes, and make waterholes more important. For animals, these changes were not distant facts. They were food or hunger, shelter or exposure, movement or death. A herd might follow fresh growth across open land. Birds might time their breeding or travel with seasons. Small mammals might survive by burrowing, storing, hiding, or feeding on varied foods. Predators followed the animals they depended on, and those animals followed plants, water, and warmth. In this way, climate shaped not just landscapes but behavior. It made routes, pressures, and risks before any human path existed. The world before human rule was therefore a world of shifting permission. Climate allowed some forms of life to gather in one place and limited them in another. It opened doors slowly and closed others without warning in the human sense. No animal could argue with a dry season. No plant could remain where its roots could no longer find what they needed. No nesting ground stayed safe if water, cold, or heat changed too much. Life responded through movement, adaptation, reproduction, and loss. Some species followed suitable conditions as they shifted. Some found shelter in smaller regions where climate remained favourable enough. Some changed over generations. Some disappeared. None of this was planned, and none of it was simple. While one part of the planet grew colder, another could remain warm. While one region dried, another might hold rivers, forests, or wetlands. Earth before humans was not ruled by one climate everywhere, but by many climates meeting many forms of life. This is why the ancient world cannot be pictured as only jungle, only ice, only desert, or only open plain. It was all of these in different places and different times. A cold steppe could exist under a wide, pale sky. A warm forest could hold damp shade and insects. A coast could change as sea level rose or fell. A mountain slope could hold zones of life stacked by height and temperature. The planet was a mosaic of conditions, and every creature lived inside one small part of that mosaic. Humans would one day learn to soften some of climate's power, with fire, clothing, shelters, stored food, migration, farming, and tools. But before that, life met climate more directly. The ancient Earth did not ask who was strongest in a story. It asked which bodies could continue under heat, cold, drought, rain, ice, wind, and season. Before kings, before villages, before fields, before roads. This was the great rule of the world. In the long world before humans ruled it, climate did not stay still. Cold ages came and went. Ice expanded over great parts of land, then withdrew again when warmer conditions returned. These changes were not brief storms passing over a single day. They could last longer than any animal memory, longer than any migration route held by one generation, longer than any forest standing in one place. When ice spread, it locked away water and changed the shape of coasts. Sea levels could fall, exposing land that had once been underwater. Shores moved outward. Islands could become connected to larger lands. River mouths shifted. Cold winds crossed open spaces where forests had retreated. Animals and plants that could endure cold, dry, or open conditions found room to live. Others were pushed away, narrowed into warmer refuges, or disappeared where the change became too great. When ice melted back, the world changed again. Seas rose, lowlands were covered, former routes vanished beneath water. Forests could return into places that had been too cold or too dry before. Wetlands formed in some low places. Rivers changed their force and direction as meltwater and rainfall shifted. A path for animals in one age might become a channel, a marsh, or a coastline in another. Before humans made maps, climate had already redrawn the earth many times. Drought could be just as powerful as cold. A region that once held reliable water could slowly become harder to live in. Lakes could shrink, grass could thin, trees could fail to return after dry years. Animals that needed regular water had to move farther, gather more tightly around remaining sources, or face hunger and thirst. predators followed prey, and prey followed plants and water. A waterhole could become a place of life and danger at the same time, drawing bodies together under pressure. In wetter times, the opposite could happen. Plants spread, insects increased, rivers filled. Young animals might have better chances if food became abundant, but wetter did not always mean easier for every species. Floods could destroy nests, change channels, drown low ground, and reshape feeding places. Climate was never a simple gift or a simple enemy. It favored some lives while making others more difficult. Every change opened doors for certain bodies and closed doors for others. The world before human rule was therefore full of movement. Not movement guided by curiosity or conquest, but movement driven by survival. Animals followed rain, new growth, warming seasons, cooling seasons, river valleys, coastlines, and open ground. Plants moved more slowly through seeds, pollen, wind, water, animals, and generations. A forest did not walk, but its range could shift as seeds survived farther in one direction and failed in another. Grasslands could expand where trees no longer held. Cold-adapted animals could spread when open. Chilly landscapes widened, then shrink when warmth returned. Warm-adapted plants could advance during milder times. Life was always answering the weather of centuries and millennia, even when no creature understood it as climate. This matters because humans later learned to resist climate in ways other animals could not, with fire, clothing, shelters, stored food, tools, and shared knowledge. But before humans ruled the earth, most life met climate with the body it had. Fur, feathers, fat, migration, dormancy, burrowing, timing, diet, breeding season, and range were the answers available. Some answers worked for a while. Some failed when conditions changed too far or too fast. The ancient world was not cruel in a human sense, but it was unforgiving. A body either met the world closely enough to continue, or its line narrowed and vanished. Ice, drought, rain, and sea level did not care which animals were familiar, strong, or beautiful. They changed the stage on which all life had to stand. And long before humans arrived, Earth had already taught this lesson many times. No creature rules a planet whose climate can move the ground beneath its life. Before humans learned to soften climate with fire, clothing, shelters, stored food, and shared knowledge, every creature met the changing air more directly. A cold night was not an inconvenience. It was a test of body heat, shelter, fat, fur, feathers, burrows, and timing. A dry season was not a problem to be solved with wells, roads, or carried water. It was a pressure on roots, leaves, herds, insects, predators, eggs, and young bodies. A long winter could decide which animals had stored enough energy, which birds had moved at the right time, which plants could wait in seed or root, and which lives would not continue. This was the ancient rule of climate before human rule. The world did not bend around need. Need had to bend around the world. Life answered through movement, sleep, migration, breeding seasons, slower growth, smaller ranges, hidden refuges, and bodies shaped across generations. Some animals followed green places as they returned with rain. Some moved toward warmer ground when cold spread. Some survived by eating many kinds of food. Some survived by becoming highly suited to one narrow way of life, though that strength could become weakness if the world changed too far. Plants answered more slowly, but they answered too. Seeds waited. Forest edges shifted. Grasslands widened or narrowed. Wetlands appeared where water gathered and vanished where water failed. The ancient earth was never one stable home for all life. It was a moving set of permissions, and each creature lived only where its body could meet them. This is why climate ruled more deeply than any later human power. A king can command people, but not reign. A border can divide land on a map, but it cannot stop cold from spreading or a river from shrinking. A road can guide human feet, but before roads, animal paths already followed water, shelter, and season. Climate made its own geography. It made open corridors when ice lowered seas and exposed land. It closed passages when water rose again. It turned forests into broken woodland, woodland into grass, grass into dry ground, and dry ground back into green when conditions changed. These shifts did not happen with human drama. They happened through thousands of ordinary days. One dry year, then another. One colder generation, then another. One shoreline moving a little, then a little more. To the animals living through it, there was only the present. Less food here, more water there, colder wind, later spring, a safer valley, a failing nest, a longer walk. Over time, those present moments became the deep pattern of survival and extinction. The world before humans ruled it was therefore not ruled by the largest animal, the sharpest tooth, or the fastest foot. Those things mattered, but only inside the limits climate allowed. A powerful predator could not remain where prey disappeared. A heavy grazer could not remain where plants failed. A nesting bird could not keep a place that no longer held the right season. A forest animal could not keep its forest if dryness or cold pushed the trees away. Strength was always borrowed from conditions. When conditions changed, strength had to change with them. This thought prepares us for the next part of the journey. After the age of dinosaurs, after long recoveries and changing habitats, the Earth would carry enormous mammals and other large animals across Ice Age plains, forests, steppes, wetlands, and open valleys. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, wild horses, ancient bison, woolly rhinoceroses, and great cats would live under the same older law. They may look, to us, like rulers of their landscapes, but they too depended on climate, plants, water, seasons, and fragile young. Before humans became powerful enough to alter the land at a wide scale, even the giants lived inside a world larger than themselves. Climate was the quiet hand above them all, shaping where they could feed, where they could move, and how long their worlds could last. Long before humans became powerful enough to change whole landscapes, many parts of the world were shaped by the movement of great animals. They were not dinosaurs, and they did not belong to that older age of reptiles. They were mammals and other large creatures of later worlds. Mammoths moving across cold steppes, mastodons feeding in wooded places, woolly rhinoceroses standing under pale skies, giant ground sloths browsing slowly in warmer regions, ancient bison and wild horses crossing open land, and great cats watching the movement of prey. These animals lived in worlds closer to the time of humans, but still not ruled by humans in the beginning. The land was not empty beneath them. It held grasses, shrubs, trees, waterholes, frozen ground, river valleys, insects, birds, small mammals and predators. Their size made them visible in our imagination, but their lives were still built from ordinary needs. A mammoth needed food every day. A horse needed grass, water, and space to move. A young animal needed protection and enough time to grow. A predator needed prey, and prey needed plants. Even the largest body was tied to the smallest conditions: the growth of grass after rain, the survival of roots through cold, the thawing of water, the safety of a newborn, the timing of movement across land. This is the first thing to remember about the world of giant animals before human power. It was not a world of monsters, it was a world of bodies, meeting climate, food, distance, and danger. A mammoth was not a symbol of the Ice Age to itself. It was a living animal, using its trunk, tusks, feet, senses, memory, and social behavior to continue in a difficult place. A saber-toothed cat was not evil. It was a hunter with a body shaped for a certain kind of life. A giant ground sloth was not strange in its own world. It was one answer among many to the question of how a body might feed, move, defend itself, and reproduce. Before humans ruled the world, these animals filled landscapes with weight and presence, but they still lived under the rule of climate. Cold, dry steppes could support grazing and browsing animals in some regions. Warmer forests and wooded areas supported different kinds of feeding. Wetlands and river valleys drew animals toward water and plants. Open plains gave room for movement but also exposure. A large animal could travel far, but distance still cost energy. A herd could offer safety, but young animals remained vulnerable. Tusks, horns, speed, size, or strength could help, but none of them removed the need for food and water. In this world, the ground itself carried the record of life. Hooves and heavy feet pressed tracks into mud, snow, dust, and thawing soil. Bones could lie where animals died near water, in traps of mud, in caves, or under sediment. dung, teeth, pollen, and plant remains could later help people understand what some of these animals ate and where they lived. But in their own time, none of these traces were messages. They were the marks of ordinary living, the ancient bison lowering its head to graze, the horse moving with others across open land, the mammoth calf staying close to larger bodies, the cat waiting in cover, the rhinoceros turning toward the wind. These moments were not made for human memory. They belonged to a world where large mammals had become part of the planet's living rhythm. And yet, as impressive as they were, they did not rule in the human sense. They did not own the valleys, forests, or plains. They followed them. They followed weather, plants, water, season, and the movement of other animals. The world before humans ruled it was still larger than its giants. It carried them for a time, fed them for a time, tested them for a time, and held their bones when their living bodies were gone. The lives of giant animals before strong human influence were built from repetition, not from constant drama. A mammoth herd might move slowly across open ground, not because the land was empty, but because food was spread across great distances. Each body needed grass, sedges, shrubs, bark, or other plant material, depending on place and species. A large animal could not live from one small patch for long. It had to follow growth, water, shelter from weather, and the memory of roots learned through older animals. A calf stayed close because size alone did not protect the young. Wind, cold, hunger, illness, accident, and predators could still reach a small body. Around it, larger bodies offered warmth, warning, and some protection, but never complete safety. In another region, a mastodon might feed among trees and wetlands, pulling at branches or browsing in wooded places where food was different from the open steppe. Far away, wild horses might graze and move together across open land, their safety partly held in numbers, speed, and alertness. Ancient bison might lower their heads into grass while watching the distance. A woolly rhinoceros might stand alone or near others, shaped for cold environments, powerful but still dependent on plants that had to grow in harsh seasons. These were not creatures acting out a legend. They were living through the same old demands: eat, drink, rest, move, reproduce, and survive long enough for another generation. Water gathered many of these lives into the same places. A river valley, lake edge, thawing stream, spring, or muddy pool could become important, because bodies had to return to water again and again. The tracks around such places might be layered with many kinds of movement: hooves, padded feet, claws, heavy rounded prints, lighter steps from smaller animals, and the marks of birds or insects along the edge. A drinking place could be quiet for hours, then crowded for a short time, then empty again. It could be safe on one day and dangerous on another. Predators learned the value of places where prey came repeatedly. Scavengers learned the value of fallen bodies. Insects and microbes worked wherever death opened matter to the ground. Before humans ruled the world, even the largest animals entered the same cycles as everything else. A giant body that once pulled food from trees or crossed frozen ground could later feed wolves, cats, birds, beetles, fungi, bacteria, and soil. Nothing remained outside the web for long. Seasons gave these worlds their rhythm. In colder regions, winter could press hard on every life. Snow might cover food, ice could make movement costly. Wind could turn open land into exposure. Animals with thick coats, fat reserves, social behavior, or wide ranges had ways to endure, but endurance was never guaranteed. Spring and summer could bring new growth, insects, meltwater, softer ground, and births time to better conditions. In warmer or mixed regions, dry and wet seasons could matter more than snow. A dry time could shrink water and draw animals together. A wet time could spread plants and open feeding ground. Movement followed these changes. It was not migration as a human adventure, it was need carried across land. The world of giant mammals before human power was therefore both grand and ordinary. Grand because the bodies were huge, the distances wide, and the landscapes often open enough for movement to feel immense. Ordinary because every life was made of daily limits. A tusk could help strip bark or clear snow, but it could not create food where plants failed. A horn could defend, but it could not stop drought. Speed could save an animal once, but not from hunger over a long season. Strength could win a moment, but not control climate. This is the truth that keeps the scene calm and honest. The giants were powerful, but they were not separate from the earth. They were carried by it, fed by it, tested by it, and finally returned to it. Before humans became a major force in many landscapes, these animals lived inside a world that was still shaped mainly by climate, plants, water, predators, disease, accident, and time. The world of giant animals was powerful, but it was not secure forever. Like every world before it, it depended on conditions that could change. Grasslands could shift, forests could move, wetlands could shrink or spread, ice could advance and withdraw, sea levels could rise and fall. A region that once fed large herds might become drier, warmer, colder, wetter, or broken into smaller habitats. For a small animal, such changes could be difficult. For a very large animal, they could be even more serious, because a large body often needs more food, more space, and reliable places to move, drink, breed, and raise young. A mammoth, mastodon, giant sloth, ancient bison, wild horse, or woolly rhinoceros might seem almost unshakable when imagined alone. But no animal lives alone from its world. Each one was tied to plants, water, season, birth rates, disease, predators, and the survival of its young. When those ties weakened, strength could become less useful. A tusk, horn, thick hide, large foot, or heavy body could help in certain moments, but none of these could stop a landscape from changing. This is one reason the end of many giant animal worlds must be told carefully. It was not one simple story everywhere. Different species disappeared in different places and at different times. Climate change played an important role in many regions. Habitats changed as ice age conditions ended or shifted. Plants changed with temperature and moisture. Water sources changed. Some animals lost the kinds of open, cold, or mixed environments they had depended on. In some parts of the world, human hunting and human expansion may also have added pressure, especially as people became more skilled, more social, and more able to use tools, fire, and planning. But it would be too simple to say that one cause explains every disappearance. The honest picture is more complex. Changing climate, changing habitats, slower reproduction in large animals, and the growing presence of humans may have worked together in different ways. Before humans ruled the world, the giants were already living inside a delicate balance. When humans began to enter more landscapes, that balance became more difficult for many of them. Still, we should not turn these animals into only victims at the edge of human history. For most of their lives, and for countless generations, they belonged to worlds that were fully their own. They moved under skies without fences. They crossed rivers without bridges. They followed food without roads. They gave birth, gathered, wandered, fought, rested, aged, and died in landscapes shaped mainly by weather, plants, water, and other animals. Their lives were not waiting for extinction to give them meaning. A mammoth calf staying near its herd mattered in that moment. A horse finding grass after a hard season mattered in that moment. A predator feeding after hunger mattered in that moment. A fallen giant returning to scavengers, beetles, microbes, and soil mattered in that moment. The ancient world was full of such moments, complete before anyone wrote them down. As this chapter closes, the world before human rule begins to feel closer to us, but also more fragile. The animals are no longer separated from us by the deep distance of dinosaurs. Some of them lived near the time of early humans, some shared landscapes with human groups. Yet at first, humans were not masters standing above them. They were small, vulnerable, watchful creatures, moving through a world already occupied by enormous bodies, sharp predators, deep cold, long distances, and old rules. The giants remind us that size is not the same as control, and that even the strongest lives depend on the world around them. Now the story must turn toward the late arrival of humans themselves, not as rulers yet, but as one more animal trying to survive inside a planet that had been ancient, alive, and dangerous long before they came. When humans finally entered the world, they did not arrive as rulers. They arrived as bodies that could be cold, hungry, injured, lost, frightened, and tired. The land was already occupied. Great animals moved across open places. Predators watched, followed, listened, and waited. Rivers cut through valleys that had existed long before any person stood beside them. Forests held shade, food, insects, danger, and shelter, but they did not open themselves easily. Night was dark in a way modern people rarely know, because there were no lamps, no houses, no roads, no safe walls, and no familiar map waiting in the mind. Early humans had abilities that mattered deeply. Hands, memory, cooperation, learning, tool use, eventually fire, and the power to pass knowledge from one generation to another. But those abilities did not make them masters at once. At first, they were late arrivals inside a world already full of other lives. A human group moving through such a landscape had to notice everything. Where was water? Which plants could be eaten? Which animals were dangerous? Where was there cover from wind or rain? Where might stone be found? Where had other animals passed? What sounds belonged to birds, insects, flowing water, or something approaching through brush? The world before human rule was not a simple wilderness for people to explore. It was a demanding place that tested attention every day. A broken ankle, an infected wound, a failed hunt, a lost child, a sudden storm, or a long dry season could change everything. Humans were not the largest animals, not the fastest, not the strongest, and not the best protected by teeth, claws, fur, horn, or hide. What they had was a different kind of strength, one that grew slowly, the ability to learn together. One person could remember a water source, another could notice tracks, another could shape stone, another could carry a child, another could keep watch. Knowledge could stay with a group after one day ended, and that made human life different. Still, this difference was fragile in the beginning. A tool had to be made before it could help. Fire had to be found, kept, understood, and later controlled. A memory had to be taught before it could protect the young. Cooperation had to hold under hunger, fear, and distance. The ancient world did not become easier simply because humans had entered it. The same climate still ruled, the same cold still came, the same predators still needed food, the same rivers could flood. The same dry seasons could thin plants and animals. The same giant bodies crossed the land according to needs much older than human speech. To imagine early humans honestly, we should not picture them standing above nature, already destined to own it. We should picture them listening, watching, carrying small tools, staying close to one another, moving with caution through a world they did not yet control. They may have used caves, rock shelters, open camps, or temporary places depending on time, region, and conditions. But no shelter made the whole world safe. They may have hunted, scavenged, gathered, shared food, and learned from elders, but no skill removed uncertainty. They lived inside the same rule that had shaped every creature before them. Continue if you can, adapt if you must, and pass something forward before the world changes again. This is what makes the human arrival so quiet at first. It was not the moment Earth became ours. It was the moment one more vulnerable species began learning how to survive in an ancient world that had never been waiting for it. The difference between early humans and the world around them did not appear as sudden power. It appeared as memory carried in living bodies and shared between minds. A wolf could remember a trail. An elephant could remember water. Birds could remember seasons. Many animals learn, watch, and respond to experience. Humans were not the only creatures with memory or intelligence, but in human groups, memory began to gather in a different way. One person could learn where a certain stone broke well. Another could remember which valley held water after dry weeks. Another could know the signs of an animal passing recently. Another could remember a plant that caused sickness, or a sheltering place where wind was weaker. These memories did not have to die with one body if they were shown, repeated, corrected, and passed on. Before humans ruled the world, this was one of the first quiet shifts. Knowledge could begin to outlive the moment. A child could watch an elder strike stone and later try the same motion. A young hunter could learn from tracks without discovering everything alone. A group could return to a place because someone remembered it. A warning could be given before danger arrived. A story, gesture, mark, or repeated practice could hold experience long enough to guide another day. This did not make early humans safe, but it gave them a way to carry the past forward. Tools also changed their relationship with the world, but not like magic. A sharp stone did not make a weak body invincible. A wooden point did not remove hunger. A scraper, flake, or cutting edge still had to be made with skill, carried with care, and used at the right time. Tools mattered because they extended what hands, teeth, and nails could do. They helped cut, scrape, break, dig, process food, work hides, shape wood, and divide a carcass more effectively. But every tool depended on knowledge. Where to find good material, how to strike it, how not to waste it, how to teach the motion, how to remember the place where more could be found. In this way, the tool was never only an object. It was also a memory of practice. It showed that humans were beginning to live not only through bodies, but through learned methods shared across a group. Fire, when humans learned to use and control it, changed the night in a deeper way. It could bring warmth, light, protection, cooked food, and a center around which bodies gathered. Yet fire also required attention. It could die. It could burn. It had to be fed, guarded, carried, or remade depending on the time and place. It did not turn the whole earth into human territory. Beyond the light, the ancient world remained vast. Darkness still held animals, cold, wind, and distance. Still, around a small flame, human life could become more focused. People could rest closer together. Food could be softened. Stories, gestures, and teaching could happen in a shared circle of light. The fire did not rule the world, but it gave humans a small place where the world felt less overwhelming for a while. Cooperation was the thread tying all of this together. A single human alone was vulnerable. A group could watch, gather, carry, teach, share, protect, and remember more than one body could. This is where human strength slowly became different from the strength of tusks, claws, speed, or size. It was not located only in muscle. It was spread between people. It lived in attention, trust, imitation, care for children, help for the injured, shared food, and memory passed through time. Before humans ruled the world, they survived by becoming less alone inside it. They did not conquer the ancient earth in one step. They learnt it piece by piece through hunger, mistakes, observation, loss, and repeated teaching. And this slow accumulation of memory was the beginning of a power that would one day change forests, animals, rivers, and fire itself. Even with memory, tools, fire, and cooperation, early humans were still small inside the world. Their power grew slowly, and for a long time it remained local, fragile, and dependent on conditions. A group could know one valley well, but not the whole planet. They could carry fire, but still fear rain, wind, and darkness. They could shape stone, but still lose a hunt. They could remember water, but not make water appear in a dry land. They could share food, but not prevent every illness, injury, or hungry season. This is important because it keeps the human story honest. Humans did not step into the ancient world and immediately take control. They entered it as learners. They watched animals that were stronger than they were. They followed signs in mud, broken grass, sound, smell, and movement. They gathered what the season offered. They rested where shelter could be found. They moved when food, water, weather, or danger required it. The earth was still larger than them in every direction. Mountains were not crossed because humans desired it, but because bodies, time, need, and knowledge slowly made crossings possible. Rivers were not mastered at once. Forests were not owned. Plains were not open property. The world was still filled with other lives moving according to their own pressures. Yet something had begun to change. Human groups could carry more than hunger from one day to the next. They could carry methods. A child could learn which stones broke into sharp edges. A younger person could learn where animals gathered after rain. A group could remember that a certain shelter protected them in one season but not another. The dead could leave lessons through what they had taught. The old could become valuable not only for strength but for memory. Slowly, the world around humans became more knowable to them, not because it became simpler, but because knowledge accumulated. A place could become familiar, a route could be repeated, a danger could be warned about, a useful plant could be shown, a tool-making motion could be corrected, fire could be guarded more carefully. This growing memory did not change the whole earth at once, but it changed the human place within it. Humans began to live partly in the present world and partly in remembered worlds. The last dry season, the old water source, the place where stone was found, the animal path used before, the shelter that held warmth, the story of what happened when someone went too far. Before human rule, this was the seed of human power. Not domination, not ownership, not cities, but shared memory becoming durable enough to guide behavior. Still, the ancient world remained itself. A storm could erase tracks. A flood could change a crossing. A herd could leave a region. A cold season could break plans. A predator could enter the edge of firelight. A child could become sick. A stone tool could break. Knowledge helped, but it did not remove uncertainty. This balance is the most truthful way to see early humans, no longer just another animal in every way, but not yet rulers of Earth. They were between vulnerability and transformation. They belonged to nature, but they were beginning to change their relationship with it. They feared the dark, but they could make a small light. They needed the land, but they could remember it. They were shaped by climate, hunger, and animals, but they could teach one another how to answer those pressures. Over many generations, this quiet difference would grow. It would lead to wider movement, more complex tools, stronger traditions, symbolic thought, art, burial, farming much later, villages, cities, and the deep alteration of landscapes. But that future should not be rushed. At this point in the story, humans were still standing inside a world that was not theirs. The rivers, forests, animals, winds, ice, and stars all belonged to older patterns. Humanity had arrived, but rule had not. The next question is how a species that began so small slowly came to look at an ancient planet and call it home. Before humans called the Earth theirs, they first had to learn how to belong to it. That belonging did not begin with ownership. It began with attention. A river became known because people returned to it, drank from it, crossed it, followed it, and remembered what happened near its banks. A hill became known because it could be seen from far away, or because it gave shelter from wind, or because animals passed below it in certain seasons. A tree, a cave, a bend in the land, a patch of stone, a place where water gathered after rain, all of these could become familiar before they became named in the fuller human sense. The world was still ancient and larger than human life, but human minds were beginning to hold small pieces of it more carefully. A place no longer existed only as ground, shade, water, or danger. It could become a remembered place, a return to place, a place that carried experience. This was a quiet change, but it mattered. When memory gathered around a location, the land began to enter human life in a new way, not as property yet, not as a nation, not as a map, but as something known through repeated survival. A group could remember where stone was good, where fruit ripened, where animals crossed, where shelter held warmth, where water stayed after dry weeks, where danger had once come too close. The world before humans ruled it was still not under human control, but it was slowly becoming more humanly understood. Naming, in time, deepened that change. To name something is not the same as owning it, but it is a way of bringing it into memory. A river with a name can be spoken of when no one is standing beside it. A mountain with a name can be remembered across distance. A dangerous place can be warned about. A useful place can be described. A path can be taught. Before writing, before maps, before borders, spoken memory could already make the world travel inside human minds. This did not make the earth smaller, but it made parts of it more reachable through language. A place could now exist in a story before the body arrived there. An animal could be spoken of before it appeared. A season could be expected because elders remembered its return. The stars, weather, tracks, plants, and movements of animals could become signs, not because they changed in themselves, but because human minds learned to connect them. This was the beginning of a different kind of power, not the power to dominate the whole planet, but the power to hold the world in shared attention. Yet we should not mistake this for full rule. A name did not stop a flood. A story did not make winter gentle. A remembered hunting ground did not promise that animals would return. A known shelter could collapse, flood, or become unsafe. The ancient Earth remained unpredictable, and humans remained dependent on it. What changed was the relationship. Humans were no longer only reacting to each day as it came. They were carrying yesterday into tomorrow. They were building a human layer over the older Earth, a layer of names, warnings, roots, memories, gestures, teachings, and meanings. Beneath that layer, the old world continued. Rivers still moved according to gravity and rain. Forests still grew where conditions allowed. Animals still followed food, water, and season. Climate still shifted beyond human control. But above these older processes, human understanding slowly spread. A valley could be both a valley and a remembered refuge. A fire could be both burning wood and a center of teaching. A trail could be both animal movement and human return. This is where the final part of the journey begins. Not with humans suddenly owning the world, but with humans slowly learning to carry the world inside memory, and then beginning to change it because they remembered. The more humans remembered, the more they could return, repeat, and change. At first, these changes were small beside the age of the planet. A tool shaped from stone did not alter a continent. A fire kept through the night did not command the climate. A shelter of branches, hides, or stone did not make the wilderness disappear. Yet each small act changed the human relationship with the world. Fire could make a cold night more bearable. A cutting tool could open a carcass, shape wood, scrape hide, or prepare food. A remembered path could make distance less uncertain. A shared warning could turn one person's danger into the group's knowledge. Before humans ruled the earth, they began by making small circles of control inside a much larger world they still depended on. Around a fire, darkness was pushed back for a few steps, but beyond it the night remained old and wide. Along a familiar route, people could move with more confidence, but beyond it the land still held unknown water, animals, cliffs, storms, and hunger. A place could be used again and again, but it was not yet mastered in the modern sense. It remained part of a living system older than human plans. Over time, human actions became more lasting. Fire could be used not only for warmth and food, but in some places to influence vegetation, open ground, drive animals, or make movement easier. Hunting could affect animal populations, especially when combined with climate stress, slow reproduction, or changing habitats. Gathering could shape which plants were noticed, protected, carried, or returned to. Later, in some parts of the world, people began to cultivate plants and manage animals, and that changed the relationship even more deeply. But this did not happen everywhere at once, and it did not happen in one simple step. For a long time, many human groups remained mobile, following seasons, water, animals, fruits, roots, shellfish, and other foods. In other places in later times, people stayed longer, planted, stored, built, and returned to the same land with stronger expectations. The world did not suddenly become human property. It became human-shaped gradually, unevenly, and differently from region to region. This is important for keeping the story honest. Human rule was not born in a single moment when one person lit a fire or made a tool. It grew from repeated actions across generations. A burned patch could change which plants returned. A hunted herd could become smaller or more cautious. A trail used often could become clearer. A campsite used again could leave ash, stone flakes, bones, and worn ground. A seed carried by accident or intention could grow in a new place. A shelter repaired again and again could make one location more important than another. Each act was small in itself, but memory made small acts accumulate. The same place could be used, taught, changed, and used again. This was the beginning of a human layer on the ancient earth. Beneath it, rivers still moved, climate still shifted, forests still grew or retreated, animals still followed food and water, and soil still formed through decay. But above it, human choices began to leave patterns. The planet that had once lived completely without us was now being touched by a species that could remember yesterday, imagine tomorrow, and act together. Still, even then, humans were not outside nature. They were changing the world from within it. They needed wood, water, stone, plants, animals, shelter, warmth, and one another. Their power came from the earth they were beginning to alter. This is why the rise of human influence should feel both remarkable and humbling. We became powerful not because the world was waiting to be owned, but because we learned, slowly, how to make our memory visible on the land. What, then, was the world like before humans ruled it? It was not one world, and it was not one scene. It was an earth of changing seas, moving climates, forests rising and falling, wetlands holding old water, insects working in dark soil, dinosaurs feeding beneath ancient skies, mammals hiding and later spreading, birds crossing air before anyone watched them as signs, giant animals moving through cold plains and warmer forests, and finally small human groups learning how to survive inside a world already full. It was not empty before us. It was not meaningless before us. It was not waiting in silence for our arrival. The world had already been alive for a very long time, and most of its life had passed without a single human witness. That thought can feel cold at first, because it removes us from the center, but it can also be strangely comforting. It means we belong to something older than our worries, older than our borders, older than our names, older than the stories we tell about importance. Human life is recent, but it is not worthless. It is recent in the way a flame is recent when it appears in a long night, small, brief, fragile, but capable of light. The lesson is not that humans do not matter. The lesson is that we matter as part of a larger living world, not as the reason the world exists. When we remember that, the earth becomes harder to treat as a possession. A river is not only water for us. It is also a path of minerals, fish, insects, plants, animals, floods, sediments, and time. A forest is not only wood, shade, or land to be cleared. It is roots, fungi, birds, mammals, soil, rain, decay, seeds, and generations of life that began long before any human boundary. An animal is not only useful, dangerous, beautiful, or rare to us. It is a body living from its own hunger, fear, movement, and need to continue. To understand the world before human rule is to practice humility without despair. It reminds us that control is always partial. Even now, with cities, satellites, machines, farms, roads, and lights that push back the night, we still live inside climate, water, soil, air, plants, animals, microbes, and the limits of our own bodies. We changed the world more than any earlier creature we know, but we did not leave the world behind. We are still breathing its air, drinking its water, eating from its living systems, and standing on ground made by older processes. The ancient earth teaches us that life is continuous, but not guaranteed. Powerful worlds have vanished before. Giant bodies have disappeared. Forests have moved. Seas have covered land. Climates have changed. Survivors have carried life forward in new forms. Our place in that story is unusual because we can know some of it. We can look backward through bones, stones, pollen, ice, ash, shells, and soil. We can understand that the planet was complete before us, and that our power gives us responsibility, not permission to forget. Perhaps that is the quiet value of looking into the world before humans ruled it. It slows the mind. It softens the old belief that everything begins with us. It lets us see human history as one late layer resting on many deeper layers. Rock, water, plants, animals, climate, death, renewal, and time. And when the night becomes still, and we imagine rivers flowing without names, forests breathing without footsteps, and stars shining over lands no voice had ever described, we may feel our own lives differently, not as masters standing above earth, but as brief witnesses inside a story much older than memory. If the world was already ancient, alive, and complete before us, then what does it mean to belong to it now?